Today is Suicide Prevention Day, worldwide. Every 40 seconds, somebody takes their lives by suicide in the world. Every 40 seconds. This was an important episode for me to do. This is Keenan. He's like a brother to me. 2 years ago, he took his life by suicide, leaving behind so many people that loved him and a lot of unanswered questions. Only 50% of the people who suffer from mental health illnesses actually get help. So I wanted to find out why. I wanted to find out why suicide in the United States is the second leading cause of death for children between the ages of 15 and 24. Why 800,000 people worldwide a year take their life by suicide. This is an important episode, you guys. It's heavy. A lot of questions, but there's also a lot of answers. So I went to the Suicide Prevention Center here in Los Angeles to ask as many questions as I could come up with. From my own experience, there was so much guilt. Why I didn't see it. What could have been done. Anger, frustration, sadness, and then loss. The most important thing that I learned in this interview that you're about to see, a lot of things, but one of the most important things is to talk about suicide. We have to talk about suicide because that is how you help people, and also by saying people's names. I learned that for the last 2 years, I didn't really talk about my loss because too many questions. And so you're supposed to say their names. So this episode is for all of you because I love you. I'm here. We're all here for each other. Nobody's alone. There is help. There is help if you are contemplating suicide. There is help if you know someone who is contemplating suicide. And there is help if you are left behind. So the most important thing I learned is that we say their names. So this episode is for all of you, but this one is for my brother Keenan.
So these were our founders,
Okay.
Warren Farborough and Ed Schneidman, and they started in 1958. They thought maybe there is a way we could prevent suicide if we understood more. They researched the suicide notes that
Really?
were left behind that were in the coroner's office. That's how it started.
They were both doctors.
Yeah, and it turned out when they started the hotline, it was just them and their wives, in the garage answering phones. And then after Marilyn Monroe's death, when it was ruled a possible suicide, all of a sudden calls started flooding in. And so then they decided they needed to go to 24 hours.
Yeah.
And so they had to train people how to answer the phones.
Right.
So now, all these years later, we have 200 trained volunteers that each one is trained for at least 96 hours of training.
Wow.
And they answer the phone around the clock. Our doors are never closed. We always have our suicide prevention counselors here.
Now, do you think the suicide of Marilyn Monroe allowed people to know that it wasn't something to be ashamed of? Or do you think that it potentially inspired people?
I'm not sure about the Marilyn Monroe case, but there are many other cases where it has been shown that the way the media would cover a suicide can have an impact on increasing suicide rates. After Robin Williams died, his method was widely publicized. The numbers of suicide using that method went up. But the thing was, back then, when Marilyn Monroe died, it was taboo. You know, and that's been the case for a really long time, which is why we thought it was so important to put Suicide Prevention Center on the outside of the building. But we don't know of any other standalone suicide prevention center that has the name on the outside of the building where people can say, oh, there's a place maybe I can go.
And you see it. You drive by and it catches your eye. I think that it jumped out at me because you don't see the words a lot out in public.
One woman said she was ready to just walk into traffic and end her life unless she saw a sign from God. And then she saw our sign. And so then that became her sign. And she came in, we had counselors talk to her, she went to the hospital. She was able to choose life because of our sign.
That's beautiful.
And I just want to tell you one thing. It's not, everybody does this. We all say commit. We're trying to train everyone not to say commit. And here's why. The word commit, well, what do you commit? You commit sins. You get committed to jail. You're committed to a penitentiary. You know, we're trying to use the word died by a little more neutral because of the history.
So died by suicide or attempted suicide.
We don't want to define people by either one act that they might come to regret.
It's such an important thing for you to mention, though, because that's one of the things that is so important to me is breaking that stigma around suicide.
You know, another thing that reminds me, you find out your friend's father died. What do? You go, you bring a casserole. You give them a call. How are you doing? You go for a visit. You bring flowers. You send them a note. When somebody hears that, oh, his relative died by suicide, people get, oh my God, maybe I'm not supposed to know. I better not say anything. I don't want to mention it, make it worse. I don't think I should go to the funeral. Well, what happens? That person who suffered this loss, they don't get the support.
They're not suffering alone.
Where's my casserole? Somebody wrote a book called that. Where's my casserole? There's no casseroles. Just teaching people that, well, this is somebody who lost someone. It's a death, like any other death.
Absolutely. Instead of not talking about it, because we're trained to not talk about it because it's a private thing. That's really important.
This is where we have our support groups.
Either for people who've either lost someone or people who have attempted.
And if somebody isn't in the Los Angeles area, is there access on your website for them to find a center in their area?
We can help. We can help them find if they're outside of LA for sure. But this is very exciting. This is our child and family therapy suite.
Oh, look at little Piglet.
When it comes to kids, there's just, you know, a child who's lost either a sibling or a parent. Very few places for them to go where they can get, you know, really good trauma-informed therapy and support. And so this is a program we're really proud of.
This is so great. There are so many children who have been affected by suicide. I cannot imagine, you know, what a child goes through, and just the little brains trying to understand it. And this feels like such a safe place. I love all the animals.
So one of the things that you had mentioned was that someone being at risk is different than showing warning signs. And I'd love for you to touch on that, because that was, to me, it was an aha moment of, oh, right. It does make sense that those are two very different things. Can you talk a bit about being at risk and warning signs?
Sure. Well, there are a lot of things that can put a person at risk. If you have lost someone to suicide, especially someone close to you, if you have a mental health condition, like depression, bipolar disorder, if you have a family history of suicide, if you're under prolonged stress. Sometimes people can be pushed to a place of feeling very hopeless.
Right.
Anything that can push a person to that place, maybe
Right.
financial problems, relationship problems can do
Right.
that. If you are using a lot of drugs and
Absolutely.
alcohol, it clouds judgment.
Yeah.
That can create risk factors.
Right. And if a person has more than one of those, does it just increase the risk even more? It sort of
Sure.
compounds on itself. Right.
Absolutely. Also, a lot of women have been exposed to whether it's sexual abuse, trauma, domestic violence.
Right.
Those are things that put women at risk
Really?
too. Yeah.
It's good that people know that if somebody is a victim of domestic violence or sexual abuse, that they're at risk.
If someone is not acting the way they usually act, they're sleeping more than usual or not sleeping at all, maybe not eating, they're withdrawing, they're saying things like, I don't feel like I deserve what other people deserve, or I feel like a burden on others.
Right.
This is a big warning sign.
That is really important because a friend of mine has a child who those exact words were in a letter. I am a burden. I feel like a burden. That must feel really hard for
Right.
somebody to feel like they are a burden.
Exactly. Oh, giving away possessions.
Really?
Sometimes people will start, all of a sudden they're giving like their favorite things away. That's a
Right.
sign. Or, making wills. I mean, there's a time in life when that makes sense, but
Yeah.
there's sometimes when maybe that seems a little odd. Why is that person
Right.
making a will right now?
Right. I've heard that there are some times when if somebody has finally made their mind up to take their own life, that they actually will get happy very almost like manically from a depressed state. You think to yourself, oh, they're doing better. And that is that moment where there is almost a sense of relief that they've made up their mind.
Exactly.
Right.
That's true. That is, if somebody has been depressed for a long period of time and then all of a sudden there's a big shift in mood where, everything is going to be fine now. Oh, yeah, no, I'm good now. That is something to be thinking about and maybe like, why is it everything's going to be good?
Right.
What are you thinking? What does that mean?
Yeah. What are you supposed to do? What are some things that people can do if they know someone is at risk and then they potentially see some warning signs? What do you recommend people do if it's a friend, a family member?
Well, the first thing is to ask the question.
Right.
If you're comfortable and if you're able to hear the answer.
Okay.
What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Are you thinking about killing yourself? Can you ask it in a way that doesn't feel judgmental, that doesn't feel like it's conveying the message, there's something wrong with you, you're selfish, you're weak,
course.
all of these things. So asking it in a compassionate, neutral way,
Right.
being able to really hear what
Right.
they're saying,
Yeah.
and then the danger is higher if they've started making a plan.
Got it.
So it's one thing to think about suicide,
Okay.
and a lot of people will think about suicide and never take it a step further.
Yeah.
But if you're like starting to look for a gun or, hoarding pills, or there's all these other things that people sometimes do because they're making a plan,
Right.
that's when now you're at a very much elevated risk.
Right.
And at that point, you think that the
Absolutely.
risk is imminent or they're in the middle of an attempt,
Yeah.
you call 911. That's
Okay.
the thing to do. And don't be afraid of calling 911 if you think that something's about to happen or is
Right.
going to happen. Or if you can't reach someone, you can call the police and say, I need a welfare check on my loved one.
Absolutely.
They're not answering the phone. I'm really worried something's wrong. I know they're there. And a lot of times, let's face it, it's really hard to
Yeah.
hear your loved one
Yeah.
say, I'm thinking about killing myself.
Absolutely.
But there's an amazing resource that can help you. The Lifeline number, 1-800-273-8255, where actually there's a big movement trying to turn that into a 3-digit number,
Oh, that would be
which
lovely.
would be wonderful, where
Yeah.
it's being studied right now, because that's a lot to remember.
It's a lot to remember if you're
Yeah.
in the midst of that desperation and that loss of hope, either for yourself or seeing it in someone else.
Although if you tell Siri on your
Really?
iPhone, I'm thinking about suicide, she'll give you the Lifeline number.
Leave it to technology.
amazing.
So thank God for
Yeah.
that. And the thing that some people don't know about the Lifeline is that it's not just for the person who's feeling suicidal.
Right. I didn't
we
know
get
this.
a
This is
lot
great.
of calls from people who are worried about someone else. What do I do?
Right.
And sometimes, as I say, like, you're worried. Maybe you were able to ask the question but didn't really know where to take it from there.
Right.
You could say, look, why don't we call the crisis line? You could do it together,
Right.
or you could do it separately and tell the person, here's the number, please call.
Right.
It's a tremendous resource, 24/7. It's confidential.
Nationwide.
It's anonymous. It's all over the nation. Wherever you are in the nation, you call that number, and they'll give you resources. They'll give you advice, and help you sort out is this an imminent risk situation
Right.
or not. What else should I do if they're starting to talk about plans?
Yeah.
One of the most important things you can do is make sure they don't have access
Yeah.
to the means they're thinking
So
of.
whatever they're talking about, if somebody has set a plan in motion or started planning something, making sure that the actual tools in the plan are not at their disposal is important.
So if it's a gun, you take the gun.
Got it.
If it's, whatever
If
it
it's
is.
pills, you
Right.
get them out of the house. Whatever.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. If I know that somebody is suicidal, what should I not do?
One thing that's really important is, and especially for teens, younger people, a lot of times teens will tell their friend, I'm going to tell you this, but don't tell anyone. Swear you won't tell anyone.
Right.
Now that kid who's got that knowledge doesn't want to betray their friend.
Right.
But we really try to teach them, look, it's better to have your friend mad at you and alive
Yeah.
than to not say anything and they're dead. And that's true for adults too.
I was just going to say, in a world where communication is suffering right now, that is probably true for everyone.
You need to involve people who can help, because no one person can do it alone. And especially if you're not in the same vicinity, or if you're not able to go over there. Look, somebody who's suicidal and is really seriously making
Right.
plans should not be left alone.
Right.
And if you can't be there, or maybe you don't even know the person that well,
Yeah.
well, you got to let people know so that they can
Right.
get there. And don't take it lightly. If somebody says it, I was just feeling that way, and I'm
Right.
upset that you took it so seriously. Well, you know what? Suicide is not something we could take lightly.
No, absolutely.
And even if the person changes their mind, they're not, well, okay, it's important for them to know that if they're seriously thinking and talking about suicide, something's going to happen,
Yeah. One of the things that has been so sort of striking for me is why this is becoming so seemingly prevalent in young adults and teenagers and young children, 11, 12 years old.
Well, I don't think we can ignore the impact of social media.
Absolutely.
Because the thing about it is, in the old days, maybe, somebody had a picture of you, an embarrassing picture, you could get rid of it.
Yeah,
Or
you
somebody
got the photo, you ripped it up.
You ripped it up. Or someone said something mean, not everybody would know. But there's no place to hide. They really can amplify the effects of bullying or isolation.
Right.
People posting, they're at the party, you're not there.
You're not there.
Well, in the old days, you wouldn't even know about that party. But, everybody's
true.
posting about it.
Yeah.
So,
In real time, those
Right.
are real time emotions.
and then, of course, young people, this has always been the case, but the brains aren't as developed. To cope with adversity, they don't have the same kind of resilience. They don't know that, you're going to get through it. It's not always going to be this hard.
Right.
That's just maturity and brain development.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then there's also how the media portrays
Right.
suicide and the whole contagion issue, which is real.
Yeah.
It's documented that if you sort of glamorize or romanticizing it, that for a young person who's feeling hopeless, desperate, friendless,
Yeah.
the fantasies of revenge, fantasies of, well, then they'll remember me. There's all
All
it
of that.
feeds into all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I
have had feelings like that myself of, when I was younger and now even where, they'll miss me when I'm gone. As a child, if that's romanticized in television and film, and that seems like a realistic option. What do you do as a parent with that social media?
I think it's really important for parents to, know about their kids' social media habits.
Right.
It's important for them to talk about maybe their own mental health challenges. Sometimes parents don't ever want to share that with their kids, and their kids look at them as, they're impervious,
their lives are so great,
and I'll never be able to live up to my dad's success or mom's success, and they don't know what the struggles really are because the parents are trying to protect them. But that's, I think, important, being able to have conversations with your kid, which is really hard for a lot of parents most of the time, most of us as parents. The other thing that's really important for parents is knowing the warning signs.
Are they different for a child than they are for adults, those warning signs, or are they very similar?
Well, one of the reasons you want to kind of know about your kids' social media is that a lot of kids, will put little warning signs on their social media. There could be little hints of a sense of hopelessness that comes across in their posts. And if you see that, that's a really important piece of information to have and to follow up on. So much social interaction happens there now that for you not to know what's going on there, you're at a real disadvantage. You don't want to be in a constant state of high alert. But again, do you have a family history of suicide? Is there a family history of substance use? If there is, there's a chance your kid's going to have that too.
And that's when those risk factors come in.
Those risk factors, and then you need to be a little more vigilant or thoughtful, or maybe you need to monitor things a little more than you would otherwise.
Right. So the next thing I want to talk about that is really, hard to talk about is that if now somebody has taken their life by suicide, what resources are available for those people? If there is that feeling of guilt, I know when my friend took his life, there was a tremendous amount of guilt. I should have called him more. I should have done this. There had to have been warning signs. How did I miss this? What do we do now? What do you do for those people? What resources are available for those people?
Well, all the things you just described are so common, and everybody who's lost someone to suicide goes through some version of that. The guilt, the feelings of responsibility. If only I could, go back and do something differently. It's a very painful healing process to get to a place of being able to realize that it isn't your fault. You did the best you could. You didn't know. And we can try to be there for people, but there are things we can't control. I think personally that, things happen in life. We want to think we could make a difference because it helps us. We want to feel like we have more control over things than we do. But some things truly we don't have control over. And what I really recommend is that somebody who has lost someone, these are very normal feelings, and it's painful. And especially if you're a parent or a spouse, no matter whatever your relationship is, it is awful. And there's really pretty much only one place you can find relief, and that's in the company of other people who've experienced that loss. They get it. We have our support groups. We get parents of teens, we get brothers, sisters, spouses. They meet for 8 weeks, and we have them all over Southern California. And what they get out of that is the ability to heal, to see other people who are farther along on the path.
It gives them hope.
That you're not always as awful as it feels, that guilt, that feeling that I lost him, I did something wrong. That does change over time as you get more distance on it. It's a very hard process. And then for some people, and especially, the other thing about suicide loss, depending on, there can be trauma involved for the survivor finding your child dead, however it happens. That is an image that people live over and over and over, and so sometimes, support groups aren't quite enough. They need therapy to help cope with that kind of trauma. So I think the support groups,
that sense of community
therapy,
and people that really understand what they're going through is important.
there is a relief in that.
I wanted to talk about those judgments that we place on people that are contemplating suicide.
Or people who have attempted.
Yeah.
One of the things that they'll say is that people will have responses like, "Oh, that was so selfish," or "How could you do that to
People
your
say
family?"
it all the time.
They do, or they say it amongst each other. Can you believe? Or even about somebody who did die by suicide. And partly there's anger about it, and so they were selfish, they were weak. I remember one story of a woman whose father died by suicide, and her mother never told her. She thought it was a heart attack, and she didn't find out for 10 years. And the mother was horrified when she started telling people about it. And she said, "Nobody will marry you
Oh my gosh.
if they know that you had a father who died by suicide." Wow. And there is this sense that people have, well, if you have attempted suicide, maybe people will think I'm not good enough or not trustworthy in my job, in my relationships, and
that you're broken in some way.
In some way.
Right.
One thing that our CEO, she attempted suicide as a young woman, and she talks about it all the time.
Yeah.
She's running this agency. She went on to have a great life, but she did actually attempt suicide twice, actually.
Yeah.
And so, the message being that it doesn't mean you can't heal, you can't get better, you can't have a good life.
Right.
I myself thought about suicide seriously enough that I called the hotline when I was 14.
I wanted to touch on this. You mentioned that
Yeah.
you had called the hotline. Tell me a bit about that. You seem to have a lot of experience with suicide in your life.
Yeah, well, I was 14 years old, and I was looking for a rope, and I felt very desperate and alone and friendless and ashamed of myself and just all of these things. And I called the hotline because I had seen the number advertised on the bus.
Right.
And I called, and a woman talked to me for about an hour and a half. And I'll tell you, it was the first time in my life at that point that I felt like, wow, maybe I'm not as bad as I think. Maybe I could have a good life, or that there's some hope, for me.
That interesting that a 14-year-old would think that there's no hope.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. What I love, though, is that you've turned it around and you have dedicated your life now to helping people, which is absolutely beautiful. And this facility is a testament to that. I mean, this is just, this is it really is a beacon of hope, because you drive by and you see it instantaneously. Yeah. And that's the thing that feels so important with people that are contemplating suicide or dealing with guilt or anything around this what's the right word that we use, this tragedy, that there is a place to go, there is help, and that you can smile again. You can have it. It doesn't have to define you. So I just want to give that number one more time for people in this country, and then the center's website, so people can find that.
Yeah, we're at 1-800-273-8255. It's a network of crisis lines, so if one line is too busy, it rolls over to another one. Great. So they're always answered. But there are, other countries will have their own resources often. Our website is ddhirsch.org. We have our aliveandrunning.org.
Great.
That's our one event that supports the center, and it allows us to do things like offer the free support groups, to go into schools, to go into businesses, to go into churches and synagogues and teach about suicide prevention and teach about the warning signs, what you're supposed to do and how to respond. So
great. Thank you so much.
Those things. Thank you.
No, this
so
was
much.
lovely. I think that the main thing that I've taken away from this is that communication is key, And there is no shame. We just have to have open, honest communication. And if you think that somebody is at risk, you can ask them if they are contemplating taking their life. And that's
And if
so
you're
important.
afraid to ask or don't know how to ask or need some advice on whether you even should ask,
Right.
call the Lifeline.
Call that
They're-
number. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. This was
Thank
lovely. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
you so much.
We have to normalize talking about mental illness in this country and in the world. There are days when I need help. There are days when we all need help. There are days when you feel lost, alone, like a failure, unloved. I have felt all of those things in my life. And I know that I'm not alone. And so I just want to let you know that you are not alone. And that if you need help, please go talk to somebody. There's no shame in admitting that you need help. I love you all very much. Thank you so much for watching this episode.